The people everyone laughs at are sometimes the ones destiny has already chosen. The grand mating hall of Silver Ridge shimmered beneath hundreds of crystal lanterns suspended from towering cedar beams, their warm golden light reflecting across polished stone floors worn smooth by generations of alpha ceremonies. Every seat surrounding the enormous circular arena had been filled long before sunrise. Noble alphas from neighboring packs sat beside respected elders, wealthy merchants, and influential families, all waiting for the year's most anticipated event. Soft music drifted through the vast chamber while attendants in elegant uniforms guided young Omegas into neat rows along the center platform. Each hopeful face carried its own mixture of excitement, fear, and quiet expectation. Some smiled confidently, dressed in elaborate gowns stitched with silver thread and decorated with sparkling jewels borrowed from proud relatives. Others nervously adjusted perfectly arranged hair or whispered silent prayers beneath trembling breaths. At the far end of the line, almost hidden behind the taller girls standing before her, Claire Bennett quietly folded her hands together. Her simple cream-colored dress lacked expensive embroidery. The sleeves had been carefully repaired more than once, though every stitch had been sewn so neatly that only someone looking closely would notice. Her long blonde hair rested naturally over her shoulders, untouched by fashionable ornaments, while her soft blue eyes remained lowered toward the polished floor. She had grown accustomed to becoming invisible whenever crowds gathered. Nearby conversations floated toward her without anyone realizing she could hear them. She should never have entered. Poor thing. No alpha will even glance her way. She always looks like she wandered into the wrong room. Claire had heard versions of those same words for most of her life. Years earlier, neighborhood children had laughed whenever she walked through the village square. As she grew older, the teasing simply became quieter, disguised behind polite smiles and sympathetic looks. They called her the ugly duckling often enough that eventually people stopped using her real name altogether. Surprisingly, the nickname no longer hurt the way it once had. What still hurt was watching kind people believe they needed to apologize every time someone else judged her appearance before learning who she truly was. Claire never answered cruelty with anger. Instead, she spent her mornings delivering fresh bread to elderly neighbors, repairing worn blankets for children whose families struggled through difficult winters, and helping Mrs. Harper organize supplies inside the community kitchen without asking for recognition. None of those things made anyone notice her during ceremonies like today. Around the arena, one Omega after another stepped forward as Alpha representatives quietly observed them. Murmured conversations rose and faded while attendants recorded names upon long parchment scrolls. Several young women received immediate attention from influential families. Proud parents smiled through happy tears as hopeful futures seemed to unfold before everyone's eyes. Claire remained where she had always been, patiently waiting without expectation. Then everything changed. The enormous entrance doors at the opposite side of the hall slowly opened. Every conversation stopped at once. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. Heavy footsteps echoed across the stone floor as Nathan Walker entered beneath the towering archway. At 31 years old, the King Alpha carried neither arrogance nor unnecessary display. His dark formal coat bore only the ancient crest of his pack upon one shoulder. His dark hair framed a calm, composed face, while steady gray-blue eyes quietly surveyed the gathering with thoughtful restraint instead of pride. The atmosphere itself seemed to shift as every person respectfully stepped aside. Nathan acknowledged no applause, accepted no elaborate greetings, and walked directly toward the center platform where the Omegas waited in perfect silence. One by one, he calmly observed each hopeful face without lingering long enough to suggest preference. Claire lowered her eyes even further, expecting him to pass exactly as everyone else always had. His footsteps continued. Then suddenly they stopped. A quiet murmur spread through the hall. Claire slowly looked up, uncertain why the silence had changed. Nathan stood directly before her. Their eyes met for the first time. His calm expression remained unreadable as though searching for something invisible beneath the surface everyone else had already judged. Without hesitation, without consulting advisors, and without looking anywhere else, The King Alpha lifted one hand toward the quiet young woman everyone believed no one would ever choose. "I choose her," he said simply. The entire grand mating hall fell into absolute silence. For several long seconds, no one in the grand mating hall seemed capable of breathing. The silence spread through the enormous chamber more quickly than any whisper ever could. Noble families stared toward the center platform with open disbelief while attendants holding ceremonial scrolls froze exactly where they stood. Even the musicians lowered their eyes, uncertain whether they had misunderstood what they had just heard. Claire remained perfectly still. She looked over her shoulder once, almost expecting Nathan to be pointing towards someone standing behind her. There was no one else. His hand remained gently extended in her direction, steady and unmistakable. Her blue eyes widened with quiet confusion. "Me?" she asked so softly that only those standing nearest could hear. Nathan met her gaze without hesitation. "Yes." Around them, murmured conversations finally returned, spreading through the hall like ripples across still water. "He cannot be serious. The King Alpha chose her? Why would he ignore every noble Omega here? There must be another reason." Claire lowered her eyes almost immediately, uncomfortable becoming the center of attention for reasons she could not understand. She had spent years learning how to disappear into the background. Suddenly every face in the hall seemed fixed upon her. She could almost feel the weight of countless curious eyes studying every loose strand of her blonde hair, every repaired seam on her modest dress, every nervous breath she struggled to hide. The master of ceremonies carefully stepped forward, his polished voice unusually hesitant. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, "would you like additional time to review the remaining candidates?" Nathan answered calmly before the question had fully settled. "No." His voice carried neither impatience nor pride. "Only certainty. My decision is made." Another wave of whispers traveled through the gathering. Several influential elders exchanged puzzled glances while a few ambitious families quietly hid their disappointment behind practiced smiles. Claire felt completely unprepared for any of it. She had entered the ceremony believing she would quietly leave exactly as she had arrived, unnoticed and forgotten before sunset. Instead, destiny had somehow placed her beneath the brightest light in the room. Nathan slowly lowered his hand but did not look away from her. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Claire searched his calm gray-blue eyes, hoping to discover some explanation hidden there. She found no mockery, no amusement, no pity. Strangely, that unsettled her even more. She had learned to recognize cruel smiles long ago. Nathan wore none of them. His expression held only thoughtful observation, as though he had noticed something no one else had bothered to see. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat gently before announcing the selection according to ancient tradition. Applause should have followed. Instead, only scattered, uncertain clapping echoed across the vast chamber before quickly fading into uncomfortable silence. Nathan stepped aside, allowing attendants to escort Claire toward the ceremonial exit reserved for officially chosen pairs. As she walked beside him, she became painfully aware of every whispered conversation surrounding them. Some voices carried disbelief. Others carried sympathy. A few quietly laughed behind lowered hands. Claire kept her eyes forward. She refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing tears. Just before reaching the great cedar doors, an elderly attendant hurried toward them carrying a folded traveling cloak embroidered with the royal crest. According to tradition, it belonged to the chosen Omega for the journey back to the Alpha residence. Claire instinctively reached for the garment herself, not wishing to inconvenience anyone further. Before she could take it, Nathan accepted the cloak with both hands. Instead of handing it to an attendant again, he gently unfolded it himself and held it open. "The morning air is colder outside," he said quietly. "You should not be uncomfortable." The gesture lasted only a few seconds, yet the entire entrance hall fell silent once more. Claire looked at him in complete surprise. No one had ever offered such simple kindness in front of so many people before. She hesitated, then quietly slipped her arms into the cloak. It rested comfortably across her shoulders, warmer than she expected. Nathan nodded once before turning toward the open doors. As sunlight poured into the hall from the stone courtyard beyond, Claire noticed something hanging beneath the neckline of her own dress. A small silver pendant, hidden beneath the fabric for as long as she could remember, had slipped into view. Nathan's calm expression changed almost imperceptibly the instant he saw the ancient symbol engraved upon its surface. The bright morning sunlight spilled across the stone courtyard outside the grand mating hall, yet Claire could barely notice its warmth. Every step she took beside Nathan seemed strangely unreal, as though she had wandered into someone else's life by mistake. The royal cloak resting across her shoulders felt heavier than its soft fabric should have. Behind them, the enormous cedar doors slowly closed, muting the restless voices that still echoed from inside the ceremony. Even through the thick wooden entrance, scattered whispers continued chasing them into the courtyard. Claire lowered her eyes, instinctively hoping the attention would somehow disappear if she refused to meet anyone's gaze. It never did. Royal attendants quietly prepared the king's carriage beneath the shade of ancient oak trees while mounted guards waited respectfully nearby. The polished carriage, carved from dark walnut and decorated with subtle silver emblems, reflected the morning light without unnecessary luxury. Nathan approached it with the same calm confidence he had shown throughout the ceremony. He acknowledged every attendant with quiet courtesy instead of commanding authority. Claire noticed that each servant greeted him with genuine respect rather than fear. Before she could gather the courage to ask a single question, Nathan unexpectedly stopped beside the carriage door and turned toward her. His gray-blue eyes rested briefly upon the small silver pendant that had slipped into view moments earlier. "How long have you worn that pendant?" he asked gently. Claire instinctively touched the cool metal resting against her chest. "As long as I can remember." Nathan remained silent for a heartbeat. "Who gave it to you?" She looked down thoughtfully. "The woman who raised me placed it around my neck when I was very young. She told me never to lose it, but she never explained why." Nathan nodded slowly, though something thoughtful lingered behind his composed expression. He did not ask another question. Instead, he quietly opened the carriage door himself. "Please." Claire hesitated before stepping inside. The interior surprised her. She had expected polished luxury beyond imagination. Instead, soft woven blankets, neatly arranged books, a small wooden box filled with herbal tea, and fresh wildflowers resting inside a simple glass vase created an atmosphere of quiet comfort rather than royal excess. She carefully sat near the window while Nathan took the seat across from her, leaving a respectful distance between them. As the carriage began rolling through the village streets, curious faces appeared almost everywhere. Shopkeepers paused sweeping wooden porches. Children stopped chasing wooden hoops across the square. Elderly neighbors looked up from flower gardens with expressions of complete astonishment. Claire recognized many of them. Some had kindly greeted her every morning for years. Others had barely noticed she existed until today. None of them understood what had happened. Neither did she. They traveled in comfortable silence for several minutes before the carriage slowed unexpectedly near the village bakery. An elderly man carrying 2 heavy flour sacks struggled to lift them onto a small wooden cart waiting beside the road. Without hesitation, Nathan quietly asked the driver to stop. Before anyone else could react, he stepped down from the carriage, crossed the road, and easily lifted both sacks onto the waiting cart. The grateful baker smiled warmly. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Nathan simply returned the smile. "Safe travels home." He climbed back into the carriage as though nothing unusual had happened. Claire watched him with quiet curiosity. Most kings would have ordered someone else to help. Nathan looked briefly through the carriage window toward the old baker before answering. "If my own hands are free, why should I ask someone else's?" His simple reply lingered in Claire's thoughts long after the carriage continued forward. She realized the man sitting across from her looked nothing like the distant ruler described in village gossip. He seemed more interested in small acts of kindness than displays of power. As the carriage left the village behind and entered a peaceful forest road lined with towering pine trees, sunlight filtered through the branches above, casting moving patterns across the floor between them. Claire absent-mindedly adjusted the royal cloak around her shoulders, causing the silver pendant to catch another beam of light. This time Nathan did not hide his reaction. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly before he quietly reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed an old folded parchment. He compared the symbol sketched upon the yellowed page with the engraving hanging around Claire's neck. They matched perfectly. Claire stared at the old parchment resting in Nathan's hands, her attention drawn not to the faded paper itself but to the expression that had quietly replaced his usual calm composure. For the first time since they had met, genuine surprise crossed the King Alpha's face. It lasted only a heartbeat before he carefully folded the parchment again and slipped it back inside his coat, as though revealing any more would be unfair before he understood the truth himself. The carriage continued deeper into the forest, its wooden wheels rolling gently across the shaded road while beams of afternoon sunlight filtered through towering pines. Claire looked down at the silver pendant resting against her dress. "Have you seen this symbol before?" she asked softly. Nathan remained silent for several moments. "Only in very old records." His answer was honest but incomplete. Claire sensed it immediately. "What does it mean?" Nathan looked toward the passing trees outside the carriage window before answering. "I do not know enough to give you the right answer." She nodded quietly. Somehow that response felt more trustworthy than an explanation built upon guesses. The peaceful silence between them was interrupted when the carriage rounded a bend overlooking a narrow mountain road. Ahead, an old merchant's wagon had become stuck where one wheel had slipped into soft ground after the previous night's rain. Several travelers stood nearby, trying unsuccessfully to free the heavy cart without damaging its cargo. Before the driver could ask for instructions, Nathan gently tapped the carriage wall. "Please stop." The royal escort immediately halted. Nathan stepped onto the roadside without hesitation and walked toward the stranded travelers. Claire watched through the open carriage door as he greeted the elderly merchant with the same quiet respect he had shown the village baker earlier that morning. There were no grand speeches, no commands, and no expectation of praise. Nathan simply removed his formal gloves, placed one shoulder carefully against the wagon, and worked alongside the merchant and his family until the wheels slowly climbed back onto the road. Nearby guards offered assistance only after seeing their king working beside ordinary travelers instead of above them. Within minutes the wagon moved freely once again. The grateful merchant reached into a wooden crate and offered Nathan a polished silver coin in thanks. Nathan smiled politely and gently closed the man's hand around it. "Buy fresh bread for your grandchildren instead." The elderly merchant's eyes filled with gratitude as the royal carriage quietly resumed its journey. Claire found herself smiling without realizing it. Nathan noticed the expression reflected faintly in the carriage window. "What is amusing?" he asked. She shook her head gently. "Nothing amusing." She looked down at her hands before continuing. "You are very different from the stories people tell." Nathan leaned back slightly against the carriage seat. "Stories become easier to remember than people." Claire considered those words while the forest slowly opened into rolling hills covered with wildflowers. They traveled another mile before reaching a small stone bridge crossing a crystal-clear stream. Several children played nearby, laughing as they skipped smooth stones across the water. One little girl accidentally dropped her handmade cloth doll into the current. Before anyone else reacted, Claire quietly stepped from the carriage, lifted the edge of her dress just enough to keep it dry, and carefully reached the toy before the gentle current carried it farther downstream. She smiled warmly as she returned it to the grateful child, kneeling just long enough to brush a few leaves from the doll's faded dress. The little girl's joyful laugh echoed across the quiet valley. Nathan watched every movement without saying a word. He noticed how naturally Claire comforted frightened children, how easily she forgot herself whenever someone else needed help, and how no one had to ask before she acted. As she climbed back into the carriage, she apologized softly. "I hope I did not delay our journey." Nathan looked at her with thoughtful eyes. "Not every worthwhile destination is measured by how quickly we arrive." Claire lowered her gaze with a shy smile, unaware that Nathan was no longer wondering whether he had made the right choice at the auction. Instead, for the first time, He had begun asking himself why everyone else had failed to see what had been quietly shining inside her all along. By late afternoon, the royal carriage finally reached Ironwood Keep, the ancient residence of the King Alpha, where towering stone walls overlooked endless forests stretching toward distant blue mountains. Unlike the grand castles Claire had imagined while growing up, the keep carried a quiet dignity instead of overwhelming luxury. Flower gardens surrounded the entrance courtyard, climbing ivy softened weathered stone walls, and colorful songbirds nested beneath wooden balconies warmed by the afternoon sun. Servants quietly greeted Nathan with genuine smiles rather than fearful bows, each returning naturally to their work after offering respectful welcomes. Claire stepped carefully from the carriage, still wrapped in the royal cloak, uncertain whether she truly belonged inside the place now standing before her. Nathan noticed her hesitation but said nothing that might make her feel pressured. Instead, he simply walked beside her through the open courtyard. A young stable boy accidentally dropped a wooden bucket while hurrying across the cobblestones, spilling fresh apples in every direction. Before the nearest servant could react, Claire immediately knelt to gather the rolling fruit one piece at a time. The frightened boy repeatedly apologized, convinced he had embarrassed himself before the King Alpha. Claire smiled warmly as she handed him the final apple. "Everyone drops something eventually," she said gently. "The important part is helping each other pick it back up." Nathan quietly watched the exchange without interrupting. The stable boy's anxious expression slowly relaxed into grateful relief before he hurried back toward the barns. As they entered the main hall, several members of the household staff paused briefly to observe the newly chosen Omega. Claire instinctively expected the same curious whispers she had endured throughout the auction. Instead, an elderly housekeeper stepped forward carrying a simple tray with warm tea and fresh bread. "Welcome home," she said kindly. Claire looked surprised by the words. Home. No one had ever used that word for a place she had only just entered. She accepted the tea with both hands. "Thank you very much." The elderly woman smiled gently before returning to her work. Nathan led Claire through wide hallways lined with bookshelves, paintings of former leaders, and large windows overlooking peaceful gardens instead of military displays. The residence reflected learning, tradition, and quiet service far more than power. Near the center courtyard they passed an old stone fountain surrounded by blooming white roses. Several gardeners struggled to lift a cracked ceramic flower pot that had become too heavy after recent rainfall. Without thinking, Claire placed her teacup upon the fountain's edge and joined them, carefully steadying the fragile pot while the gardeners repositioned it safely beneath a shaded arbor. One elderly gardener thanked her with visible gratitude. Most guests simply walk past. Claire brushed a little soil from her sleeves and smiled. Flowers bloom more beautifully when someone notices them. Nathan heard every word. He noticed something else as well. Not once since arriving had Claire asked where her own room would be, what clothing she would receive, or what privileges came with becoming the king's chosen Omega. She remained completely focused upon the people surrounding her instead of herself. As evening approached, Nathan quietly excused himself and walked alone toward the oldest wing of the keep where the royal archives had been preserved for generations. He unlocked a carved oak cabinet hidden behind rows of ancient books and carefully removed the same weathered parchment he had studied inside the carriage. Beside it rested a leather-bound volume filled with faded illustrations and forgotten family records. He gently opened the fragile pages until he reached an ancient drawing of the exact silver symbol engraved upon Claire's pendant. Beneath the illustration appeared a handwritten note preserved across countless generations. Nathan's calm gray-blue eyes slowly widened as he read the first sentence. "The bearer of this crest shall never be recognized by appearance alone, for the true heir of the Moon Guardian bloodline will always enter history wearing the face the world chooses to overlook." Nathan remained alone inside the royal archives long after the evening bells echoed across Ironwood Keep. The ancient book rested open upon the heavy oak table, while warm candlelight danced across faded ink that had survived countless generations. He carefully read the passage again, refusing to trust his first impression. "The bearer of this crest shall never be recognized by appearance alone, for the true heir of the Moon Guardian bloodline will always enter history wearing the face the world chooses to overlook. He slowly closed his eyes. The words explained far more than the symbol itself. They described Claire almost perfectly. For years she had lived unnoticed despite quietly changing the lives of everyone around her through simple kindness. Nathan gently turned another fragile page. Additional illustrations showed the same silver pendant hanging around the neck of a woman surrounded not by wealth or soldiers, but by ordinary families seeking comfort during difficult seasons. Beside the drawing, another sentence had been preserved in elegant handwriting. The Moon Guardian protects through compassion before authority, humility before recognition, and service before honor. Nathan rested both hands upon the table as quiet realization settled over him. He had entered the mating auction expecting nothing more than another ceremonial obligation. Instead, destiny had placed before him someone whose greatest strength had never depended upon beauty, status, or reputation. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The elderly royal librarian quietly stepped into the archive carrying another stack of carefully restored manuscripts. His silver hair reflected the candlelight as he noticed the open volume before Nathan. "You found the old Guardian records," he observed gently. Nathan nodded. "How many people know these still exist?" The librarian smiled sadly. "Very few. Most dismissed them as legends long ago." Nathan looked back toward the pendant illustrated upon the page. "Have they ever been proven false?" The old man considered the question carefully before answering. "Legends usually survive because someone mistakes forgotten history for impossible stories." Nathan quietly thanked him before returning the precious volume to its carved wooden cabinet with remarkable care. Meanwhile, across the peaceful gardens of Ironwood Keep, Claire wandered slowly through the evening courtyard unable to sleep. The unfamiliar surroundings felt peaceful rather than intimidating. Lanterns illuminated winding stone paths between blooming white roses while a gentle fountain reflected the first stars appearing above the darkening sky. She paused beside the herb garden where an elderly groundskeeper struggled to lift a heavy watering bucket after a long day's work. Without saying anything, Claire quietly carried the bucket to the final flower bed and helped finish watering the herbs beneath the fading sunlight. The old groundskeeper smiled warmly. "Most guests spend their first evening exploring the grand halls." Claire looked toward the small lavender blossoms swaying gently in the breeze. "Flowers do not know whether someone is important. They only know when someone remembers to care for them." The old man chuckled softly. "That sounds like something my late wife used to say." Claire smiled, happy simply to listen as he shared stories about the gardens they had planted together decades earlier. Neither of them noticed Nathan standing quietly beneath the stone archway several yards away. He had returned from the archives intending only to cross the courtyard before dinner. Instead, he found himself watching Claire once again choosing another act of kindness when no one expected it, and when no reward waited afterward. She had no audience, no ceremony, no reason to impress anyone. She simply helped because helping felt natural. Nathan remembered every whispered insult spoken about her inside the grand mating hall only hours earlier. He looked at Claire tending flowers beside the elderly groundskeeper, then remembered the ancient words preserved inside the forgotten book. The true heir enters history wearing the face the world chooses to overlook. For the first time, Nathan no longer wondered whether the old records described Claire. He began wondering who had worked so hard to hide someone so extraordinary from the world. As Claire turned to leave the garden, the silver pendant resting beneath her collar briefly caught the moonlight once again. This time the engraved symbol reflected a faint silver glow that disappeared almost instantly, leaving Nathan standing perfectly still as one impossible question quietly formed inside his mind. Had the pendant recognized that she had finally come home? The following morning dawned beneath a sky painted with soft shades of gold and pale blue, while Ironwood Keep slowly awakened to the comforting sounds of daily life. Bells echoed gently across the courtyards, kitchen fires filled the cool air with the scent of fresh bread, and servants greeted one another with warm smiles as another peaceful day began. Claire rose early, long before anyone expected her to. The unfamiliar room prepared for her overlooked the eastern gardens where sunlight shimmered across rows of blooming lavender and white roses. She quietly folded the borrowed royal cloak before placing it neatly across the chair exactly as she had found it, then slipped the silver pendant beneath the collar of her simple cream dress. She still could not believe she had spent the night inside the king's residence. Everything felt like a dream she feared would disappear the moment she opened another door. Instead of exploring the grand halls, Claire wandered toward the kitchens after hearing busy voices nearby. Several cooks hurried between long wooden tables preparing breakfast for the household while baskets of vegetables, fresh herbs, and warm loaves filled every available surface. One young kitchen assistant accidentally knocked over an entire basket of apples while trying to carry too many supplies at once. The bright fruit rolled across the stone floor in every direction. Before anyone else reached the frightened girl, Claire quietly knelt beside her and began gathering the scattered apples with an encouraging smile. "It is all right," she said gently. "Sometimes the floor simply asks for a little extra attention." The nervous assistant laughed despite herself. Within moments several other servants joined them, and together they finished the task with cheerful conversation instead of embarrassment. The head cook watched the exchange from across the room before quietly shaking his head with an amused smile. "She has been here less than one day," he whispered to another servant, "and somehow people already feel calmer around her." Claire spent the rest of the morning helping wherever extra hands were needed. She carried warm bread into the dining hall, arranged fresh flowers gathered from the gardens, and patiently listened as an elderly maid spoke fondly about the early years of Ironwood Keep. Every person she met found themselves smiling a little more before the conversation ended. None of it felt extraordinary to Claire. It was simply the way she believed people should treat one another. Meanwhile, inside the council chamber overlooking the western cliffs, Nathan faced a very different atmosphere. Around the long oak tables sat respected elders, senior advisors, and influential members of the Alpha Council. Several expressions carried open concern before the meeting had even begun. One elder finally broke the silence. "Your Majesty, many throughout the neighboring packs have already heard about your decision at the mating auction." Nathan remained composed. "News travels quickly." Another council member folded his hands. "The issue is not speed. The issue is perception. Many expected you to strengthen political alliances by choosing someone from a prominent family." Nathan quietly listened without interruption. A third advisor spoke more directly. "With respect, the young Omega you selected possesses neither recognized status nor known lineage. Some leaders are beginning to question your judgment." The room fell silent. Nathan slowly looked around the table before answering in the same calm voice he had used throughout the auction. "Tell me something." The elders waited. "Yesterday, before I chose Claire, how many of you had ever spoken to her?" No one answered. Nathan continued. "How many knew how she treated strangers, children, servants, or elders?" Again, only silence filled the chamber. He folded his hands calmly upon the table. "Then perhaps we should be careful about judging someone whose character we never bothered to discover." Several council members lowered their eyes. The oldest advisor finally sighed. "Character is admirable, Your Majesty, but tradition also matters." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "It does." He paused before adding quietly. "Which is precisely why I intend to learn every truth about the pendant she wears before anyone decides who she truly is." The council exchanged uncertain glances. Nathan revealed nothing further. He had not yet told anyone about the ancient Guardian records hidden inside the archives. Until he understood the full story, Claire deserved protection rather than speculation. As the meeting ended, one elderly council member remained seated a moment longer. After everyone else departed, he quietly approached Nathan and placed a weathered wooden box upon the table. "If you are searching for answers about the Moon Guardian crest," he said softly, "there is one person still alive who may remember what the archives forgot. She has not spoken to the Alpha Council in more than 30 years." That afternoon, Nathan carried the weathered wooden box from the council chamber to the quiet royal library, where sunlight poured through tall arched windows and illuminated countless shelves filled with centuries of forgotten knowledge. The box itself appeared ordinary, its oak surface faded by time, yet a small silver emblem had been carved into one corner. Nathan recognized the shape immediately. It matched the crest engraved upon Claire's pendant. Carefully lifting the lid, he found only a folded map, a dried lavender blossom pressed between two pages, and a handwritten note that simply read, "Seek Evelyn Ashcroft before another moon has passed." Nathan quietly repeated the unfamiliar name. The elderly council member had spoken as though every older alpha would recognize it, yet Nathan remembered hearing it only once as a child before the subject had been abruptly changed. Meanwhile, unaware of the growing mystery surrounding her, Claire spent the afternoon helping the household prepare supplies for a nearby mountain village that had suffered several difficult harvests. She carefully folded blankets, sorted preserved food into wooden crates, and wrote neat labels upon each package so nothing would be misplaced during delivery. No one had assigned her these tasks. She had simply noticed several servants struggling to finish everything before sunset, and naturally joined them. The head housekeeper watched quietly from across the storeroom with growing admiration. "You do not have to work," she reminded Claire kindly. Claire smiled while tying another bundle of blankets with soft linen cord. "I know." She looked around the room filled with busy hands. "But if everyone else is working, it feels strange to stand still." The elderly woman laughed gently. "Your heart is much older than your years." Later that afternoon, several orphan children from a neighboring village arrived unexpectedly with the supply wagon after helping their caretaker repair a broken bridge. While the adults discussed deliveries, the youngest children wandered nervously through the courtyard, overwhelmed by the size of Ironwood Keep. Claire noticed immediately. She quietly gathered a handful of smooth river stones from the garden path and began showing the children how to paint tiny flowers, birds, and stars using leftover natural dyes from the household workshop. Their laughter soon echoed across the courtyard as colorful little stones slowly covered the garden table. Nathan returned from the library just in time to witness the scene from beneath the stone archway. Claire sat among the children without the slightest concern for her own appearance. A streak of blue paint rested lightly across one sleeve of her cream dress while one little boy proudly held up a painted stone shaped like a tiny moon. Claire applauded as though he had created a priceless masterpiece. Nathan remained unnoticed, quietly observing how easily she transformed uncertainty into joy wherever she went. One of the older servants stepped beside him with a warm smile. "They met her less than an hour ago," she whispered. "It already feels as though she has belonged here forever." Nathan looked toward Claire, remembering once again the ancient words hidden inside the archives. "The Moon Guardian protects through compassion before authority." At that moment, one little girl reached toward the silver pendant resting against Claire's collar. "It is beautiful," the child said innocently. "It shines like moonlight." Claire gently touched the pendant. "It has always been with me." The little girl tilted her head thoughtfully before speaking words no adult expected to hear. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about ladies who wore stars around their necks. She said the real ones always helped people before anyone knew who they were." Nathan felt his heartbeat pause. The child's grandmother could only be one person: Evelyn Ashcroft. Before he could ask another question, a royal messenger hurried into the courtyard carrying a sealed letter marked with the crest of the northern mountains. Bowing respectfully, he handed it directly to Nathan. The King Alpha broke the wax seal and read the brief message. His calm expression slowly changed. Evelyn Ashcroft had agreed to receive him. But written beneath the invitation was one unexpected condition. "Bring the young woman who wears the Moon Guardian crest, for the truth belongs to her before it belongs to any king." The next morning arrived beneath a sky washed clean by the gentle rain that had fallen during the night. Thin ribbons of mist drifted across the mountain roads as Nathan's carriage departed Ironwood Keep, traveling north through forests older than any living alpha could remember. Claire sat quietly beside the window, watching sunlight slowly break through the towering pines while the silver pendant rested beneath the collar of her cream dress. She still knew almost nothing about the journey except that someone named Evelyn Ashcroft had requested to meet her personally. Nathan had explained only one thing before they departed. She is one of the last living keepers of forgotten history. Claire had nodded without asking another question. Somehow she sensed the answers she had searched for all her life waited somewhere beyond the winding mountain roads ahead. Hours later the carriage reached a peaceful valley where wildflowers covered rolling hills beneath enormous cedar trees. At its center stood a modest stone cottage surrounded by lavender gardens, fruit trees, and carefully tended herbs. It looked nothing like the home of someone connected to ancient Alpha legends. Smoke rose gently from the chimney while colorful birds rested upon weathered wooden fences. An elderly woman wearing a simple gray dress knelt beside a flower bed, carefully trimming faded blossoms with patient hands. She did not look toward the approaching carriage immediately. Instead, she finished tending the final flower before quietly placing her gardening tools aside. Only then did she raise her eyes. The moment her gentle gaze settled upon Claire, time itself seemed to pause. The elderly woman's weathered face softened with unmistakable recognition. Her eyes filled with quiet tears that reflected both joy and sorrow carried across many decades. Nathan stepped forward respectfully. "Lady Ashcroft." She acknowledged him with a small nod before continuing to look only at Claire. "Please," she said softly. "Come closer, child." Claire obeyed without understanding why her own heartbeat had suddenly become so unsteady. As she approached, the elderly woman gently lifted one trembling hand toward the silver pendant resting against Claire's dress. She never touched it. Her fingertips stopped only inches away as though simple proximity was enough. A peaceful smile slowly appeared upon her face. "I wondered whether I would live long enough to see this day." Claire looked at her in quiet confusion. "Have we met before?" Evelyn slowly shook her head. "Not in a way you could remember." Nathan remained respectfully silent. He sensed that whatever happened next belonged first to Claire. Evelyn invited them inside the small cottage where shelves overflowed with old journals, carefully preserved scrolls, dried herbs, and countless hand-drawn maps. The home carried no symbols of wealth, only a lifetime devoted to preserving memories others had allowed to disappear. Warm tea filled the room with the comforting scent of chamomile as everyone settled around a simple wooden table. For several moments Evelyn studied Claire's face with gentle admiration. "You have your mother's eyes," she whispered. Claire froze. The words settled more heavily than anything she had heard since arriving at Ironwood Keep. She had never known her mother. The woman who raised her had always explained that both of her parents had passed away when she was too young to remember them. Claire leaned forward almost instinctively. "You knew my mother?" Evelyn smiled sadly. "Very well." Tears quietly gathered in Claire's blue eyes. "Then, can you tell me who she was?" The elderly woman reached toward an old cedar chest resting beside her chair. With remarkable care she removed a faded linen cloth wrapped around something flat and carefully preserved. Slowly unfolding the fabric, she revealed a portrait painted many years earlier. Claire stared at the image in complete silence. The young woman in the painting had the same blonde hair, the same blue eyes, the same gentle smile, and around her neck rested the exact silver pendant Claire had worn every day of her life. Nathan looked from the portrait to Claire, unable to ignore the striking resemblance. Evelyn rested one hand softly upon the edge of the painting before speaking the words that would forever change everything Claire believed about herself. "The world remembers her as a forgotten servant," she said quietly. "But she was the final moon guardian queen. And you are her only daughter." Claire could not take her eyes away from the portrait resting upon the wooden table. Every familiar feature seemed to erase another piece of the life she thought she understood. The gentle smile, the long blonde hair, the calm blue eyes, and above all the silver pendant resting against the painted woman's dress mirrored her own reflection so perfectly that it felt impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Claire slowly reached toward the canvas but stopped just before her fingertips touched the aged paint. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "She was my mother?" Evelyn Ashcroft nodded with quiet certainty. "Her name was Eleanor." She carried the Moon Guardian crest with the same grace you carry it now. Tears gathered silently in Claire's eyes. She had spent her entire childhood wondering whether anyone besides the woman who raised her had ever remembered her parents. Now, within a single afternoon, the empty spaces inside those memories were beginning to fill. Nathan remained respectfully silent, understanding that this moment belonged entirely to Claire. Evelyn carefully unfolded another bundle wrapped inside faded linen. This time it contained several handwritten letters, each preserved with extraordinary care despite the passing years. She gently placed the oldest one before Claire. "Your mother wrote these during the months before you were born," she explained softly. Claire carefully opened the fragile letter, her hands trembling slightly as she recognized the elegant handwriting covering every page. She began reading aloud. "My little girl, if these words ever find you, it means the future became more uncertain than I prayed it would. I cannot promise you an easy life. I can only hope you inherit kindness before power, courage before recognition, and compassion before pride, because those gifts will protect you long after titles disappear." Claire paused as tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. Nathan lowered his eyes, allowing her the privacy of grief even while sitting only a few feet away. Evelyn waited patiently until Claire finished reading the final line before speaking again. "Your mother understood that there were people who wanted the Moon Guardian bloodline to vanish forever." Claire looked up slowly. "Is that why I never knew who I was?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes." She folded her hands together upon the table. "When Eleanor realized danger was growing around your family, she made the hardest decision of her life. She entrusted you to a woman she loved like a sister and ordered that every record connecting you to the Guardian lineage be hidden until the proper time." Claire remembered the gentle woman who had raised her with endless patience despite living a simple life filled with modest comforts. Suddenly countless childhood memories gained new meaning. The bedtime stories about kindness overcoming pride. The repeated instruction never to remove the silver pendant. The quiet tears she occasionally noticed in her guardian's eyes whenever questions about her parents arose. None of it had been accidental. Nathan finally spoke, his voice calm and thoughtful. She protected Claire by allowing the world to overlook her. Evelyn looked at him approvingly. "Exactly. Most enemies search for children raised inside castles. Almost no one searches for greatness inside ordinary villages." Claire gently folded the letter and held it against her heart. "She gave up everything so I could simply grow up safely." Evelyn smiled sadly. "Your mother believed that a child surrounded by honest people would become stronger than one surrounded only by privilege." The elderly woman then reached into the cedar chest one final time and removed a beautifully carved wooden box sealed with an ancient silver clasp. She placed it carefully before Claire. "This belonged to Eleanor. She instructed me never to open it unless her daughter arrived wearing the Moon Guardian crest." Claire looked uncertainly toward Nathan. He offered only a quiet nod. "It belongs to you." Taking a slow breath, Claire gently released the silver clasp. The lid opened with surprising ease. Inside rested a delicate moonstone ring, a folded parchment bearing the royal seal of the Moon Guardian family, and one final handwritten message resting on top. Claire unfolded the note. As her eyes reached the first sentence, her expression changed completely. The message did not begin with a farewell. It began with a warning. "Trust the Alpha King completely, because one day he will protect not only your future, but the promise I could never finish keeping." Claire held the letter in both hands long after she had finished reading its final line. The familiar warmth of the small cottage seemed to disappear as countless questions filled the quiet space around her. She slowly looked toward Nathan, who remained standing beside the window overlooking the lavender fields. He had not moved since the moment she opened the wooden box, almost as though he understood that every answer she discovered also carried the weight of another mystery. Claire finally broke the silence. "My mother knew you." Nathan gently shook his head. "I do not believe so." Evelyn Ashcroft smiled with quiet understanding. She did not know Nathan as a man. She knew the Alpha King who would one day stand where he now stands. Claire lowered her eyes toward the letter once more. The words suddenly felt less like a prediction and more like a promise carefully entrusted to time itself. Evelyn folded her hands upon the old wooden table before continuing. The Moon Guardian family preserved many records. They did not predict every future. They simply understood that character reveals itself long before destiny does. Nathan listened carefully. Then Eleanor trusted that whoever became Alpha would choose compassion over pride. Evelyn nodded. Exactly. That was the final test. Claire looked between them with growing confusion. Test? The elderly woman smiled gently. Your mother believed that the future of the Moon Guardian bloodline would never depend upon noble birth alone. It would depend upon whether the Alpha King could recognize true worth without first knowing your identity. The cottage fell silent again. Nathan slowly lowered his gaze as the full meaning settled within him. When he had entered the mating auction, he had possessed no knowledge of Claire's heritage. He had seen only a quiet young woman standing alone after everyone else had overlooked her. His decision had been entirely his own. Evelyn reached toward the parchment bearing the Moon Guardian's seal and carefully unfolded it across the table. Elegant handwriting stretched across the page beneath the official crest. This document, she explained softly, records the final wish of Queen Eleanor. Claire carefully read each line while Nathan respectfully remained silent. The message declared that no descendant of the Moon Guardian family should ever receive honor because of blood alone. Instead, the heir should first live as an ordinary citizen until kindness, humility, and compassion became part of everyday character rather than public performance. Only after those qualities had been freely demonstrated should the truth be revealed. Claire felt tears quietly gather again. Every difficult year suddenly carried new meaning. Every moment she had been ignored, underestimated, or forgotten had never taken away her true worth. Those years had simply allowed her to become the person her mother had hoped she would be. Evelyn looked at Claire with unmistakable pride. You passed your mother's greatest hope without ever knowing she had given you one. Nathan gently smiled. So did she. Evelyn turned toward him. Yes. She spoke the single word with complete certainty. Had you chosen Claire because of this crest, you would have failed. Had you ignored her because others judged her appearance, you would also have failed. Instead, you saw a woman whose actions revealed her heart before her history. That is why Eleanor trusted the future to an Alpha she would never meet. The afternoon sun slowly drifted lower across the cottage windows as quiet peace settled over the room. Claire carefully placed the letter, the moonstone ring, and the royal document back inside the carved wooden box. She did not see them as symbols of power. They were memories of a mother whose greatest inheritance had never been a title. It had been a way of living. As Nathan prepared to leave, Evelyn walked with them to the cottage door. Before they stepped outside, she gently rested one weathered hand upon Claire's shoulder. There is one final truth you have not yet learned. Claire turned back with quiet curiosity. Evelyn looked toward the distant mountains where the first evening stars had begun appearing above the trees. The Alpha Council believes the Moon Guardian bloodline disappeared forever. Tomorrow Nathan will call every elder together and reveal who you truly are. But when they see you standing before them, they will discover that your greatest claim has never been your family name. It has already been written across every life you quietly changed before anyone knew your name at all. The following afternoon, every seat inside the great council hall of Ironwood Keep had been filled. Sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows, casting gentle patterns across the polished stone floor where generations of Alpha leaders had gathered to decide the future of their people. Today the atmosphere carried an unusual stillness. Council elders sat beside respected pack leaders while representatives from neighboring territories quietly observed from the outer gallery. News had already spread that the King Alpha intended to make an important announcement regarding the young Omega he had chosen at the mating auction. Many arrived expecting clarification. Few imagined they were about to witness the restoration of a forgotten chapter of their own history. Claire entered beside Nathan wearing the same simple cream-colored dress she had worn since arriving at Ironwood Keep. Although the moonstone ring now rested upon her hand, she had chosen not to replace her modest clothing with elaborate ceremonial garments. The silver pendant remained around her neck exactly as it always had. Nathan had offered every royal tradition available to her that morning, yet Claire had quietly smiled before answering. "I would rather they recognize me before they recognize my clothing." Nathan respected that decision without question. As they walked together toward the center of the hall, familiar faces watched from every direction. Some belonged to the council members who had doubted Nathan's choice only days earlier. Others belonged to servants, gardeners, cooks, and stable workers who had already come to admire Claire's quiet kindness through simple daily moments. Nathan stepped forward first. His calm voice carried naturally throughout the chamber without needing to rise. "Several days ago many among you questioned why I chose Claire Bennett during the mating auction. Today I will answer that question completely." He paused before looking toward Claire with unmistakable respect. "When I selected her, I knew nothing about her family, her history, or the pendant she carried. I knew only what every one of you could have discovered for yourselves if you had taken the time to speak with her." A thoughtful silence settled across the room. Nathan continued. "Since then I have learned that Claire is the daughter of Queen Eleanor, the final Moon Guardian Queen, and the last living heir of that ancient bloodline." Quiet gasps spread through the gathering as several elderly council members slowly rose from their seats in complete disbelief. Nathan gently raised one hand before speculation could begin. "But that is not why I stand beside her today." His words immediately restored silence. "Her family history explains where she came from. It does not explain who she has become." He turned fully toward the assembled council. "Long before any of us knew the truth, Claire chose kindness when no reward followed. She served strangers who could offer nothing in return. She comforted frightened children without seeking recognition. She helped servants while believing no one was watching. She earned respect before anyone knew her name." Nathan then stepped aside, allowing Claire to stand before the council alone. She felt every eye resting upon her, yet the fear that once followed such moments had quietly disappeared. She looked around the chamber and recognized not judges but people who simply did not know her yet. Her voice remained gentle and steady. "I never knew my family carried an important name. The woman who raised me taught me that every person deserves dignity whether anyone notices them or not. If I have done anything worthy of respect, it belongs first to her and to my mother, whose kindness reached me through words I only read yesterday." Several council members lowered their heads thoughtfully. The oldest elder slowly approached the center of the hall carrying an ancient ceremonial staff. For a long moment he simply looked at Claire before speaking. "Forgive us." The two quiet words echoed more powerfully than any formal speech. One by one the remaining elders rose from their seats. None bowed because of the Moon Guardian bloodline alone. They bowed because they had finally recognized the character they had overlooked. Claire instinctively looked toward Nathan. He smiled with quiet pride but did not step forward to speak for her. He understood that this moment belonged entirely to the young woman who had spent most of her life believing she would never be seen. As warm afternoon light filled the great council hall, the silver pendant resting against Claire's dress reflected the sunlight once again, brighter than ever before, while the forgotten Moon Guardian crest shone openly before an entire kingdom that had finally learned the difference between appearance and true worth. That evening the full moon rose above Ironwood Keep with quiet brilliance, bathing the ancient stone walls, peaceful gardens, and towering pine forests in gentle silver light. The celebration that followed inside the castle was unlike any royal gathering remembered by the oldest elders. There were no extravagant displays meant to impress neighboring packs, no endless speeches celebrating noble blood, and no competition for attention. Instead, long wooden tables filled the courtyard beneath glowing lanterns, where servants, council members, village families, gardeners, stable workers, and respected alphas shared the same meal together. Laughter replaced whispered judgment, and conversations flowed naturally between people who only days earlier would never have imagined sitting side by side. Claire walked slowly through the courtyard, still wearing her simple cream-colored dress despite the many elegant gowns that had been prepared for her. She greeted every familiar face with the same warm smile she had always offered, whether speaking to an honored elder or the young kitchen assistant who had once spilled apples across the courtyard. Nothing about her kindness had changed after learning the truth about her family. If anything, it had grown even gentler. The elderly housekeeper quietly watched her from across the garden before smiling to herself. "She has not become a queen tonight," she whispered softly to another servant. "She simply allowed everyone else to finally see who she has always been." Nathan stood nearby beneath an old oak tree, observing Claire with calm admiration. He remembered the first moment he had seen her standing alone at the end of the line inside the grand mating hall, overlooked by nearly everyone around her. Looking across the courtyard now, he realized that nothing about Claire had truly changed since that morning. The only difference was that everyone else had finally opened their eyes. As the evening continued, several children ran laughing through the flower gardens carrying the colorful painted stones Claire had helped them create the day before. One little girl carefully approached her and held out the tiny moon-shaped stone she had painted with blue flowers. "I made this for you," she said shyly. Claire accepted the small gift with genuine gratitude, kneeling so they stood at the same height. "I will always keep it." The child smiled proudly before running back toward her friends. Nathan quietly stepped beside Claire. For several moments they simply watched the children playing beneath the moonlight. Finally he spoke. "When I chose you, I believed I had noticed something everyone else missed." Claire looked toward him with gentle curiosity. Nathan smiled thoughtfully. "Now I understand the truth." She waited patiently. "I did not discover your worth." His voice remained quiet but certain. "Your kindness had already revealed it to everyone willing to see. I was simply fortunate enough to pay attention." Claire lowered her eyes for a moment before softly answering. "My mother hoped kindness would matter more than appearances. I think she would be happy tonight." Nathan nodded. "I believe she already is." A gentle breeze drifted through the courtyard, carrying the fragrance of lavender and blooming roses across the quiet gathering. Claire instinctively touched the silver pendant resting against her dress. It no longer felt like an unanswered question. It had become a reminder that the greatest inheritance her mother had left behind was never hidden inside ancient titles or forgotten bloodlines. It lived inside every choice to treat another person with compassion before judgment. High above the celebration, the full moon reflected softly against the pendant before its light spread across the peaceful courtyard. The oldest council elder watched the quiet moment unfold before speaking one final thought to those standing nearby. "History will remember that the Moon Guardian bloodline returned," he said gently. "But those who were truly here tonight will remember something even greater. A kingdom did not become stronger because it found a forgotten queen. It became stronger because it finally learned to recognize an extraordinary heart before searching for an extraordinary name." As music drifted softly through the gardens and the moon climbed higher into the clear night sky, Claire and Nathan walked side by side along the ancient stone path overlooking the forests beyond Ironwood Keep. The path ahead stretched peacefully beneath the silver light, carrying not the end of their story but the quiet promise of every tomorrow they would choose together, proving that the rarest treasure destiny can reveal is never hidden behind beauty, power, or titles, but inside a heart that remains kind even when the whole world chooses to look away.